West Sacramento has been populated since the gold rush. We're located, right on the pathway between the Bay Area and Sacramento, which led to the mountains, to where the gold rush was. The city only incorporated in 1987, and that was after a long period of kind of benign neglect from the powers that would be in the county. And especially, there were some things that happened that really shaped the history of West Sacramento. One was when they built Highway 50 through town. It bypassed West Capitol Avenue, which was historically the travel route for people. So we have a whole series of motels and travel-related businesses that have experienced dislocation since that time. And over the years, West Sacramento kind of became a place where our county government placed a lot of the land uses that they did not want to have in other parts of the county. So finally in 1987 there was kind of an uprising that led to the incorporation of the city, and starting at that time the city's been on an upward trajectory of building infrastructure and trying to make things better for the residents. And that started with very basic things like changing, in some cases the infrastructure was made out of clay pipes that were from like the 19th century. So it started from that basic to the point now where we're trying to become a smart city. So we're at a very interesting place because we're a population of about 53,000 people. The city still retains a real small town feel to it. There's people, if you haven't lived there for 20 years, you just got there kind of thing is the thinking if you're not a multi-generational resident. So there's very much of that small town feel. We just had a council member retire whose dad was one of the original council members. So you've got all of those dynamics, but then a lot of the urban challenges that you would expect from a jurisdiction that's located right next to the state capitol and a major, center of a major urban area. So we've got challenges around homelessness, we've got challenges around transportation, and we're just at the beginning now of our smart city planning process. The council put on the ballot and the voters approved in 2015 a ballot measure called Measure E that has given us it was a quarter-cent sales tax that the voters approved, and one of the designated uses for that was expanding internet usage and the use of smart technologies. So we have a little dedicated funding source for this, and we're at the beginning of the planning process now to create a smart city framework or a smart city plan that will help drive how those funds are to be best spent. We're to be completely candid, we're at a very rudimentary stage of our process. I mean, we're at the stage internally where I'm having conversations, people are bumping into me in the hall and they know we've got this sales tax measure, and they'll say, hey, I've got this idea for your smart city fund. And I'll say, what? And they'll say, well, it'll be something, it has a chip in it, or there's a sensor somewhere. So it's very rudimentary, and we know, at the staff level, I think our elected officials are much farther along. So we need to really catch up with them. So we're looking at identifying the need. We want to start with what are the problems in the community that are amenable to being resolved or aided with the use of these smart technologies. So we're assessing those. We're at the point of trying to look at what we can solve and what we can't, when we should try and solve it, what are the appropriate technologies, and really putting all of that into a document that will help guide the expenditure of these funds.
And Dennis, maybe you already started talking a little bit about some of your stage in the journey. I'm curious about, John, having a resource here like Dennis who has been through this. Yeah. What types of things would you like to, ask and get Dennis to share with you?
Well, I'm interested in, for one thing, how you guys went about deciding kind of the lead with the need question. Like, what were the issues? How did you go about deciding what you were going to try and solve? Because one of the things that we've noticed is that everywhere we look, there's a problem that we could resolve potentially or address through some form of smart technology. So I'm curious how in Chula Vista you went about prioritizing those for your plan.
So that is an excellent question, and I think the Smart City Strategic Action Plan that we adopted is to address that question, because we view our Smart City Strategic Action Plan not as an end state, but as this roadmap that will help us on this journey. So the very question in terms of how do we prioritize, because we cannot do everything all at one time, absolutely. We have limited funding. There's different priorities either through our policy makers or through our citizens. So this action plan is supposed to help us think about how can we go ahead and essentially position these things and look at them from an enterprise-wide standpoint. So to answer your question, that plan is is really the answer to that question. One of the things that we've been able to find out is by creating that plan, it's also helped us learn a lot about ourselves, just going through the process. It took about a year to develop this plan, bringing all the various stakeholders together. It's both an inward-facing plan as well as an outward-facing plan. We did a consumer surveys in both English and Spanish, as I mentioned. 51.5% of our citizens are multilingual. So we wanted to make sure that as we develop this plan, that we don't develop it in a vacuum, that we make sure that we're also incorporating and capturing the priorities of our businesses, our residents, and our citizens. And then with that, we were able to start thinking about, okay, this is what's important, and being able to align so that the plan really is reflective.
And did you have a component, did you go out of your way for inclusivity in terms of making sure that, communities that might not speak English were able to participate? And I'm curious about that.
Absolutely. So we did an online survey as well as an actual physical survey. So the surveys were in both English and Spanish to make sure that we captured the feedback and the input of our Spanish speakers as well.
Gotcha. And I'm curious how, within the plan, how do you balance, obviously you need to have some structure so that a plan is a plan and there's some accountability, but how within that document do you account for changing technology and the changing needs of the community? So how often do you revisit it, or is there a mechanism built in to do that?
That's actually a really good question. So one of the things that we made sure we did very well was to articulate that this plan is a snapshot in time. If we talk about this same plan next year, it could be different. But as of right here, right now, when we adopted the plan, it's reflective of what our citizens want. It's reflective of what our city leadership wants, and it's reflective of what we can and cannot do given the realities on the ground, whether it's funding or whatever opportunities we have as a city. So we made sure that we articulated that before our council members and before the public. Now, we also do realize that technology is constantly changing. We also do realize that funding sources might change. We may have some ballot measures come down the pipe in the next few months. We may have grant opportunities that may come down the pipe in the next few months. So all of those things are incorporated. What this thing does, again, is that it helps us lay out a roadmap in terms of these are the priorities of the city today, and these are some of the things that we can do today to help us eventually get there.
I have a question about project sequencing. I kind of alluded to it earlier in a conversation. If you're going to build a house, if you're looking at it in the abstract, the shingles are important, and the siding is important, and the windows are important, and the plumbing is important. They're all important, but there's a sequence to building it. You can't just pick where you want to start if you want to have a decent house when you're done. So I'm curious, using that kind of lens, how you went about your smart city improvements. What type of improvements did you guys view as foundational that needed to come before that kind of laid the groundwork for future ones, and which ones you're looking at for later?
So this plan is hot off the press. I've talked a lot about it. It was adopted in September of last year, so it's not even been 6 months, right? So it is still hot off the press. But for us, it starts with connectivity. Everything when we start talking about smart cities is really about having that communications and networking backbone that you could place all this other stuff on top. So really the focus for us right now is how can we enhance and expand our connectivity, our data capture, and our analytics functionality as a city so that we can be able to do all these other things. So right now we just concluded an RFP process to do a citywide telecommunications master planning efforts. We anticipate it's going to take about 8 to 9 months. It's going to be a very comprehensive process. It's going to look at, what existing assets do we have as a city? What are some gaps? What can we do with regards to regional nature, whether it's working with the utilities, the school districts, our friends over at the port, and then with that, making sure that we're really tight on the foundational communication infrastructure, and then everything else from that is just, I don't want to say downhill, but is a lot easier.
Sure. I'm curious, and maybe this is in your plan too. This sounds like a great plan. how does your organization handle failure? Because one of the things that, if you listen to our startup friends, they have a culture where they will try something and they'll iterate it and it'll fail and they'll take it back and they'll work on it and take it back out. And we've talked about it in different sessions. That's really hard to do in government. I'm wondering, is there a component of your plan or somewhere in your organization where you sort of encourage that kind of trial and error?
Can I take a pass on that? No. Well, failure is always difficult. I mean, we're a public organization, right? So we're risk averse. By the very nature that we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, we are a risk averse city. And because I've worked in multiple public agencies in my career, I do realize and recognize that will never go away. But there's certain levels of risk aversiveness that a city can adopt, or even the signals that leadership would send. Because when you're so risk averse, what it does is it shuts down innovation. It shuts down anybody trying to think outside the box. So one of our unique strengths as a city of I used to be with the city of San Diego too, so every so often I slip up. One of the things that the city of Chula Vista is really been able to get right is our leadership gets it. Our city manager was a former traffic engineer. He is a techie to the bone. I mean, people refer to him as our geek in chief. So it does help. I mean, he is the one driving a lot of this smart cities efforts, because when we sit around and we start talking about sensors and connectivity and all of these things, I mean, he will go there with you. And what that has done is it's created this culture and this understanding that we got to go for it and it's going to pay off. So that's important. But risk aversiveness, it's all relative. Now, are we going to go out there and be cowboys and mavericks? And no. But are we going to sit around and entertain innovative ideas? Yes.
Well, I thought the preparation process was really helpful. I felt like Smart Cities Council did a great job matching us with Chula Vista, who is a city that has a lot in common with us, but is further along on their journey. So, frequently in the course of our work, it's hard to pick the right people who can be mentors. You kind of bump into people, but it's a little random. So it was really helpful to be matched with a city that had so many things in common with us and was further along so that we could learn from them.
It was important because we feel that we're at a good place with regards to our smart cities efforts and our journey towards realization of becoming a smart city, but we haven't gotten here by ourselves. We've gotten to where we are because of networking and learning from others who've been there before us. So it's really good to be able to help mentor the next city, share with them, our trials, share with them our successes, share with them our secret sauce as to how we've been able to get there.
I think it's going to be substantial. I mean, I think the opportunity to look at their plan in the short term, just look at their plan and just what I learned up on that stage are going to be useful. But then longer term, I felt like during the preparation for this event, I got to know Dennis a little bit, so I would feel much more comfortable calling him with just off the cuff questions than I might have if I was looking him up, and trying to cold call him. So I think that might be the start of a relationship that could yield all kinds of fruit later on.